Welcome to Lukebook Money, built for Singapore. Today, a technician on $3,500 a month, who put 2 children through university. Here's the real story. Quick favor before we start. If you're new to Tiger Brokers, just tap the link in my description below, or key in the code on your screen, when you sign up. We both earn $90, and it quietly keeps these daily videos free. Thank you. Now, let's get into it. It is nearly 5 in the morning in a 4-room flat in Singapore, and a man who has just come off a night shift is sitting at his kitchen table with a letter he has read 4 times. It is his daughter's university fee bill. He earns $3,500 a month. This is the story of how a maintenance technician put 2 children through the National University of Singapore, and where every single dollar actually came from. Before we go further, let me be straight with you. Mr. Tan is a composite. He is built from the shape of many Singaporean families like this one, and every figure you will hear is rounded and illustrative, chosen to be realistic rather than to be exact. The flat was bought in 1994. 4 rooms, one of the older estates, a void deck downstairs where the uncles sit and the wedding tables come out. He is still living in it today. He never upgraded, not once, not even when he could have. His working life had a fixed shape. Out the door, onto the MRT, out to the plant, 12 hours of maintenance work on machines that do not care what time it is, then the same train home in the wrong direction against the morning crowd. He drank Kopio from the Kopitiam downstairs. $1 something, standing up, no sugar. There was a cafe near the plant selling coffee at $6, and in 20 years he never once bought one. Not out of poverty. Out of arithmetic. So let us put his pay on the table plainly, because the whole story turns on it. Gross, before Central Provident Fund, before anything, Mr. Tan earned about $3,500 a month. To give you a yardstick, and it has to be a fair one. The official median gross monthly income from full-time work in Singapore includes the employer's Central Provident Fund contribution, and in 2025 that median was around $5,750. Put Mr. Tan on exactly the same basis, at his employer's contribution on top of his $3,500, and he comes out at roughly $4,100. About 3/4 of the middle. Not poor, not near the bottom, but comfortably below average for his entire working life. His wife worked part-time as a childcare assistant, bringing home about $1,200. Together, roughly $4,700 a month, gross, feeding and housing 4 people. Now take off Central Provident Fund contributions, the housing installment, utilities, food for 4, transport, the children's school needs, and an allowance for his mother. What is left at the end of a good month is a 3-figure number. Not 4. 3. And here is the bill that landed on that table. 1 local degree, 4 years, subsidized tuition plus transport, food, laptop, books and everything else a student quietly needs, comes to somewhere north of $50,000, all in. And he had 2 children. A daughter first, and then a son who reached university 3 years behind her, once 2 years of national service were done. So the real number he was staring at, spread across most of a decade, was closer to $100,000. Do the arithmetic with me. $400 a month saved perfectly, never touched, for 4 straight years, gets you about $19,000. The bill for 1 child is $50. The arithmetic does not work. It is not close. So when the numbers do not work, your mind reaches for a door. There are usually 3, and I want to name all of them out loud before you quietly assume one of them. Door 1, the scholarship. His daughter was a solid student. Good enough for a place at a good local university, nowhere near the top of a cohort that gets fees waived. No full scholarship arrived, and none was ever coming. Door 2 and Door 3, close as well. No windfall, no inheritance, no property he flipped, no relative who wrote a check. He also never took a commercial bank loan for education, and by the end of this you will understand exactly why. There is one clue I will leave on the table now and open properly later. For 25 years, right through both degrees and out the other side, Mr. Tan never owned a car. That single refusal is worth far more than most people guess, and we will price it honestly. So where did $100,000 come from, on a below-median salary, with no scholarship and no rich uncle? It came from machinery most families never fully assemble, and from a habit that started 3 years before his first child was born. Over the next half hour, I will show you every dollar of it. So let's put a real number on the table. Before we talk about how Mr. Tan paid, we have to be honest about what he was actually paying for. Because most people, including most parents, quote a number that is simply wrong. Ask a Singaporean uncle at a copicium what a local degree costs and he will usually say something enormous. 40,000 a year. 200,000 for the whole thing. He is not lying. He is quoting the wrong price list. Every local university publishes two kinds of fee. There is the full unsubsidized cost, and then there is what a Singapore citizen actually pays after the Ministry of Education tuition grant. The gap between them is not small. It is most of the bill. The MO tuition grant is not a bursary you queue for. For a Singapore citizen undergraduate at a local university, it is applied by default and it substantially cuts the fee. Mr. Tan did not have to be poor to get it. He only had to be Singaporean. So what does a citizen actually pay? Roughly speaking, arts and social sciences land around $8,000 to $9,000 a year. Engineering sits a bit higher, closer to $9,000 to $10,000. Business is higher again, above $11,000. And I want to be clear that those are today's fees. When his daughter matriculated in 2013 they were materially lower, and that drift is part of the story rather than a footnote to it. His daughter read social sciences. His son, 3 years later, read engineering. That difference of about $1,000 a year sounds trivial. Across 4 years and one extra child, it is another few $1,000s Mr. Tan had to find. Here is the first thing families get wrong. They take the first year fee and multiply by 4. But fees drift upward almost every year. The number in your freshman letter is not the number in your final year. Multiply it out honestly, with that drift built in, and 4 years of subsidized tuition for one Singaporean child comes to somewhere in the region of $34,000 to $40,000. Call it $36,000 as our working figure for the daughter, and a little under $40,000 for the son, because engineering costs more and he started 3 years later into higher fees. If the story stopped there, it would already be hard on $3,500 a month. But tuition is only the part that comes with a letter. The rest arrives quietly, in small amounts, for 4 straight years. Start with where the child sleeps. A campus hostel room runs roughly $3,000 to $4,500 a year, depending on the room type and the meal plan. Over 4 years, that alone is another $15,000 or so. The alternative is to stay at home and commute. MRT and bus fares are a few $100s a year, which is almost nothing next to hostel. What it costs instead is about 90 minutes of that child's life, every single day, for 4 years. Then the running costs. Food on campus, a laptop that has to last the whole degree, textbooks, printing, the odd field trip. $200 to $300 a month during term is a fair, unglamorous estimate. And there is a line no spreadsheet has. The exchange program everyone else signs up for. The graduation photos. The class dinner at a restaurant, not a hawker center. Being a student among wealthier students has a price, and it is usually paid in saying no. Add it all up for a child living at home, working part-time, no hostel, no exchange. 4 years of tuition, transport, food and equipment lands somewhere around $45,000 to $55,000. Call it $50,000. Roughly speaking, tuition is about 3/4 of that envelope. Living costs and one-off equipment make up the rest. Remember that shape, because in a moment it decides everything. Put the child in hostel and that $50,000 becomes closer to $65,000. Mr. Tan looked at that difference and made a decision his children did not love at the time. Both of them commuted, for all 4 years. Now double it, because there are 2 children. The honest total exposure for the Tan household was somewhere between $90,000 and $110,000. That is the number he had to find on a technician's salary. But here is the split that changes the whole story. Tuition fees can be borrowed against through official schemes. Living costs cannot. No scheme in Singapore will lend you money for your child's laptop, Kuaitio, and EasyLink top-ups. So the real problem was never $100,000. It was $75,000 of borrowable fees, and $25,000 of cash that nobody would lend him. In the next part, we open his household ledger and see exactly what he had to work with. Before we talk about schemes and loans, we have to look at the thing most people skip. What did this family actually have, month to month, in the year that first fee letter landed on the table? We already have his gross pay, so I will not build it again. What matters here is that gross is not the number that reaches his hand. 20% comes off as his own CPF contribution before he sees a cent, and his employer puts in another 17% on top. That money is real, it is his, but it is locked into 3 separate accounts he cannot spend at the Kopitiam. The contribution splits 3 ways. Ordinary account for housing and later education, special account for retirement, Medisave for healthcare. Each has a different job, and for this story only 2 of them matter. 2 rates carry this entire episode, so hold on to them. The ordinary account earns a floor of 2.5%. The special account earns around 4%. Everything this story eventually costs Mr. Tan lives in the gap between those 2 numbers. Here is the part that matters for the whole story. His ordinary account was already busy. The HDB installment for that 4-room flat was being serviced almost entirely from it, month after month, since 1994. Remember that. The ordinary account was doing housing work long before it did education work. When we get to the CPF education loan in the next part, it is not free space he is drawing on. It is the same account, already carrying a flat. So what was the cash position? Take home about $2,800 after CPF, plus Mrs. Tan's $1,200. $4,000 in hand each month, for 4 people, in a flat that still had a mortgage running on it. Now the outgoings. Utilities and conservancy, food for 4 people mostly hawker and cooked at home, the children's school fees and a bit of tuition, transport, insurance premiums, and $200 a month to his mother that was never once negotiable. Add it all up honestly and the surplus at the end of a good month was somewhere between $400 and $600. 3 figures, not 4. A bad month with a dentist visit or a broken washing machine took all of it. Sit with that number for a second against what we built in the last part. 2 local degrees, all in. Even if he saved every single dollar of that surplus perfectly, 4 years, it does not get there. Not close. Which is why the surplus was never the answer. It was only ever the drip. And the drip started far earlier than anyone in the family realized at the time. In 1991, Mr. Tan set up a fixed transfer on payday. His daughter would not be born for another 3 years. He had no plan for university. He had never even said the word out loud. He did it because of 1985. That recession took his own father's job, and a teenage boy watched a household go from steady to silent in about a month. He was not saving for a degree. He was saving because he was afraid of months with no income. That fear turned out to be the most useful asset in the family. A fixed amount, moved on payday, before anything else got spent. Not a large amount. Just one that never stopped. It survived 1997 when the region fell apart. It survived 2003 when SARS emptied the shops and his overtime dried up. It survived 2008. He never withdrew from it, not once. For years it just sat in a savings account earning almost nothing, and later in fixed deposits whenever the rate was worth the paperwork. Singapore savings bonds could not have held any of it in the 90s, because they did not exist until October 2015. Those came much later, alongside short treasury bills. And let me be honest about what those actually paid, because people quote today's numbers backwards. For most of that stretch they returned well under 2%. Only in the last couple of years did they reach the 2.5 to 3% range. Nothing clever. Nothing you would post about. By the time that first fee letter arrived in 2013, roughly 22 years of that habit had built a pool of about $60,000. Say it plainly, because it matters. $60,000 does not pay for 2 degrees. It is the floor he stood on while he went looking for the machinery, and that machinery is the next part. So we know what he had. A small monthly surplus, and a savings habit that started 3 years before his first child was born. Now here is the lever that did the heavy lifting, and it is one most families never fully open. The Central Provident Fund has a scheme that lets a parent use their own ordinary account savings to pay a child's subsidized tuition at an approved local institution. Not a bank. Not a relative. His own retirement money, lent forward. The first thing to get right is that this is not unlimited. You can only draw a portion of your available ordinary account savings, commonly cited as up to 40%. If your OA is thin, the lever is short. The second thing is what it covers. Subsidized tuition fees only. Not hostel, not food, not the MRT card, not the laptop, not a semester abroad. The scheme touches the fee line and nothing else. Which means the moment Mr. Tan pulled this lever, he had solved maybe 2/3 of the bill and none of the rest. Hold that gap in your head. It is the whole reason Part 5 exists. Now the part people miss, and it is the honest heart of this episode. This is a loan. It is not a withdrawal, it is not a gift from CPF, and it is not free money from the government. From the moment each dollar is disbursed to the university, it starts accruing interest at the prevailing ordinary account rate, 2.5% a year. That interest clock starts in the child's first semester, not after graduation. And the repayment does not come from the parent. The student is the one legally required to repay, in cash, into the parent's ordinary account. Principal plus every dollar of accrued interest. Get the trigger right, because almost everybody gets it wrong. Repayment begins 1 year after graduation, or 1 year after the student leaves the course, whichever comes first. It is not triggered by landing a job. A graduate who starts work 3 months after convocation does not start repaying then, and a graduate with no job at all still starts repaying on schedule. The child can settle it as a lump sum or in monthly installments over a maximum of 12 years, with a minimum monthly amount that cannot be shrunk to nothing. So let us put Mr. Tan's actual numbers on it. His daughter's 4 years of subsidized tuition came to about $36,000, and $30,000 of that he drew from his own ordinary account under this scheme. The remaining $6,000 came from a different pot entirely, and we opened that pot in the next part. It did not leave all at once. It left in 8 semester chunks, each one starting its own little interest clock, so the balance owing climbed in steps rather than a straight line. By the time repayment began, 12 months after she graduated, the 2.5% had been running for about 5 years on a rising balance. 8 disbursements, each with its own clock, roughly 26 disbursement years in total. That added about $2,500 to what she owed him. Real money, but a lot less than people fear. Then his son entered, 3 years behind, and Mr. Tan did it a second time. $28,000 this time. Slightly smaller, even though engineering cost more, because by then his ordinary account had been partly refilled and there was a bigger balance in that other pot waiting to be used. Now compare this against the door most families walk through by default, the MO tuition fee loan. It covers up to 90% of subsidized fees and charges no interest while the student is still studying, which sounds strictly better. But after graduation the MO loan charges interest linked to the average prime rate, which has historically sat meaningfully above 2.5%. Over a 10 to 20-year repayment tail, that gap is not small. There is one more difference, and for Mr. Tan it was the deciding one. With the MO loan, the interest leaves the family. With the CPF scheme, the interest comes back into his own ordinary account. But here is the cost, and I am not going to soften it. Every dollar that leaves the ordinary account stops earning 2.5% for him, in his highest earning decade, when compounding time is the one thing he could not buy back. The interest his children repay does offset debt. That is the elegance of the design. But it only works out near neutral if the money actually comes back, on time, from two young adults with their own rent, their own weddings, their own lives. So the truthful sentence is this. Mr. Tan did not find money for university. He moved his retirement forward by 20 years and handed it to his children, on a promise. So the fees were handled. What was not handled was the $25,000 nobody in this country would lend him. The food, the transport, the 4 years of ordinary daily life. This part is about how the Tans closed that. And to understand how, you have to understand one number. Not his salary. Not his savings. A number most Singaporeans have never calculated for themselves, even though almost every scheme in the country runs on it. Per capita household income. You take the gross income of everyone living under that roof, and you divide it by the number of people in the household. That's it. That's the number the forms are actually asking about. You already know their gross. 4,700 a month between the two of them. So do the division. For people in that flat, 2 parents and 2 children. 4,700 divided by 4 is about 1,175 per person, per month. That single number is the hinge of this entire part. It sits well inside the more generous bursary bands. The same household earning the same money with only one child at home would have looked richer on paper, and qualified for less. The biggest piece was the MO bursary for university students. It's tiered by that per capita figure, and at the more supported tiers it's worth several $1,000s a year, roughly $3,000 up to around $5,800, depending on the year and the band. Then the smaller layers. CDC and CCC bursaries from the Community Development Councils and Citizens Consultative Committees, Community and Clan Awards, self-help group grants usually a few $100s each, sometimes up to about $1,700. And then the layer almost nobody finds: faculty bursaries, alumni awards, donor-funded grants tied to a specific department or a specific donor's wishes. Separate applications. Separate deadlines. Separate essays. Stack those 3 layers together and in a good year they covered a meaningful share of the non-tuition gap for each child. Not all of it. Nobody gets a free ride. But enough that hostel or commute stopped being a crisis and became a decision. There was one more pot, and it had been quietly filling for over a decade. The post-secondary education account, government top-ups plus whatever EduSave the children never spent in primary and secondary school, swept in automatically. Mr. Tan did not build that account. He didn't manage it. It simply existed because his children went to school in Singapore and didn't burn their EduSave on every optional program. He drew it down against approved tertiary fees. So let us close the ledger properly, once, with every dollar named. Tuition across the 2 children came to $75,000. $58,000 of that was the CPF Education Loan against his ordinary account, and $17,000 was the post-secondary education account. Living costs came to $25,000. $12,000 of that from bursaries, $8,000 the children earned themselves, and $5,000 out of the savings pool. That is the whole $100,000, and not $1 of it arrived as a windfall. And notice what that says about the savings pool. $55,000 of it never went near a fee. It sat there absorbing the dentist, the washing machine and the son's gap year. That is what a floor is for. But here is the part of this story I actually want you to remember, and it isn't a number. It's a plastic folder. Green, with an elastic band around it, kept on the shelf above the rice cooker. Mrs. Tan kept it. Inside, 6 months of payslips for both of them, CPF contribution statements printed at the community center, the HDB records, photocopies of phone rigs, front and back. And she assembled it again every single year. Because a bursary is not granted once for 4 years. It is granted for 1 academic year, and then you prove yourself poor enough all over again. There is a quiet indignity in that. Nobody is unkind about it, the officers are polite, the forms are neutral. But once a year, A man who had never once missed a shift in his working life had to sit down and demonstrate, in documents, that he had not earned enough. And the thing that stays with me is this, that money existed for years before the Tans claimed a single dollar of it. It was sitting there. The barrier was never eligibility. The barrier was knowing it existed, and being willing to ask. So the fees were handled and the gap was mostly closed. But there is a third column in this ledger, and it has no scheme name and no application form. It's what the whole family stopped spending. That's next. So far we have talked about machinery. Schemes with names, forms with reference numbers, interest rates you can look up. This part is about the side of the ledger that has no scheme name at all. Because the CPF loan and the bursaries did not close the gap on their own. What closed it was a decade of the Tan household quietly living smaller than it could have. And the single biggest line in that was a car they never bought. Mr. Tan did not own a car for 25 years. Not because he could never have afforded one, but because he sat down once, in his early 30s, worked out what one would actually cost him every month, and decided no. Here is the honest arithmetic. In Singapore, once you add the COE, the purchase price spread over the years, insurance, road tax, petrol, parking and servicing, an ordinary family car runs somewhere around $1,500 to $2,500 a month. Take the lower end of that. $1,500 a month, over 25 years, is $450,000. I'm going to say that out loud rather than gesture at it, because the whole promise of this episode is that we name the numbers. Now put that against what we established earlier. One local degree, all in, tuition and living costs across 4 years, is about $50,000. $450,000 is 9 of those. 9 degrees. Not 1.5, 9. And I want to be careful with that number, because he was never going to bank every dollar of it, and nobody does. But even a quarter of $450,000 clears the entire education bill for both of his children with room to spare. I want to be careful here. This is not a video telling you cars are morally wrong. It is simply that in Singapore, the car is the single largest discretionary decision most families ever make, and Mr. Tan made his early and never revisited it. The second decision was the flat. Same four-room unit from 1994 onward. Colleagues moved to bigger flats, some to condos, and the Tan stayed put until the mortgage was simply, quietly, finished. That matters more than it sounds. An upgrade would have restarted a housing loan in his 50s and drained the very ordinary account he was about to lend his children from. Staying put was not sentimentality. It was cash flow. Then there was the overtime. And I want to be precise about this, because everybody works overtime. Mr. Tan worked it deliberately. He picked up weekend shifts and public holidays specifically, because those carried the premium rate, and the premium rate converted almost directly into fee money. Chinese New Year, National Day, the days everyone else was at a barbecue. There is a cost to that which no spreadsheet captures. A man in his late 40s doing plant maintenance, climbing, lifting, standing on concrete, is spending something that does not come back. His niece paid part of that tuition bill. Now the children's side of the ledger, because this plan does not work if they are passengers. Both of them stayed at home. No hostel, all 4 years, both of them. That is roughly $3,000 to $4,500 a year each, removed from the bill entirely. What they paid instead was about 90 minutes a day on the MRT and bus, each, for 4 years. Both of them also worked through their degrees. Tuition on weekends, F&B shifts, campus admin jobs, event crew during orientation season. Not for pocket money, and not as a character-building exercise. The rule in that household was simple. Their own transport, their own food, their own phone bills. Not $1 of the children's day-to-day spending came out of their father's ledger. And then there was the thing nobody planned, which turned out to matter enormously. The son's 2 years of national service. It pushed his degree back so that the 2 degrees only partially overlapped. Think about what that means for a household with a few $100s of monthly surplus. 2 full tuition bills landing in the same semester would have broken the plan. Staggered, they were merely very hard. And underneath all of it sat one household rule, unwritten, that made everything else hold. Over those years Mr. Tan's pay did rise. Increments, a small promotion, a better shift allowance. The standard of living did not move at all. Every increment went to the fee pile instead of a nicer life, and that is the behavior worth copying, far more than the specific schemes. In Part 7, the bill comes due, and we look at what all this actually cost him in retirement. Part 7. The bill comes due. Because the plan does not end at the convocation photo. It ends about 6 years later, in a CPF statement, and the number on that statement is where the whole story finally gets honest. The first convocation is in the middle of the year, at the University Cultural Center. Mr. Tan takes annual leave for it, which he almost never does. His daughter walks across the stage in about 11 seconds, and he does not manage to get a clear photo of it. He is wearing a borrowed jacket. It is his brother-in-law's, a little wide at the shoulders, and he keeps it on the whole afternoon in the Singapore heat because everybody else's father is wearing one too. The second convocation is 3 years later, for his son, delayed by 2 years of national service. Same hall, same jacket, same seat somewhere near the back. In between those 2 afternoons, nothing about the flat changed at all. Now the unglamorous part. Under the CPF Education Loan Scheme, repayment starts 1 year after graduation, or 1 year after leaving the course, whichever comes first, and it is paid in cash, by the child, back into the parent's ordinary account. Not a gesture. An obligation, with a schedule. His daughter's first installment lands 12 months after she graduates, because that is what the scheme says, not because she found a job. Around $400, transferred on payday, into an account belonging to a man who was still doing weekend shifts at the plant. She paid faster than she had to. She started at $400 a month, and every time her salary moved she moved the installment with it. $600, then $800, then $1,000. Still living at home, still eating at the same hawker center. She cleared roughly $33,000 of principal and accrued interest in about 4.5 years, instead of stretching it across the full 12. His son was slower. Then, about 2 years in, he changed jobs, was between salaries for a few months, and simply could not pay. Nobody chased him. The balance just sat there, quietly accruing 2.5%. That is the part families never picture. The interest does not pause because your child is job hunting, and a father who is by now in his early 50s gets to watch his own retirement account stay a hole for longer than he planned. Eventually it all came back. $58,000 of principal across the 2 children, plus around $8,000 in accrued interest, returned in full to his ordinary account. On paper, whole again. Here is the shape of that hole over time. Money out from about 2013, the balance dropping while both degrees ran, flat through the sun's gap, then climbing back only in his 50s. Whole, but late. And this is the thing the repayment check cannot fix. The interest came back. The time did not. The best part of a decade with that money sitting outside his account is a decade of growth he simply never got, and no installment gives that back. There is a second, quieter loss. Money sitting in the ordinary account earns 2.5%, but money he could have transferred into his special account earns around 4%. You cannot transfer what is not there. Then he turned 55, and CPF does its arithmetic whether you are ready or not. A retirement account is created, a required sum is set aside, and whatever is above that you may withdraw. He sat at the same kitchen table and worked out where he stood. Mr. Tan turned 55 in 2025, so these are genuinely his cohort's numbers, not somebody else's. For a member turning 55 in 2025, the full retirement sum is about $213,000. Half of that, the basic retirement sum, is roughly $106,500, and you may set aside the lower figure if you pledge your property. And this matters more than any other caveat in the episode. That sum rises with every single cohort, so the figure for your birth year is not the figure for his. He set aside a basic retirement sum and pledged the flat. Not because it was clever, but because after 2 degrees it was what he could actually reach. The version of him who never touched that ordinary account would comfortably have hit the full sum. From 65, CPF Life pays out for life, and the size of that payout follows the sum you set aside. At a basic level, roughly 900 to 1,000 a month. At the full level, closer to 1,700. That gap is permanent. And here is one thing he never used that I am not going to pretend was a loss, because that would be dishonest in the other direction. He never once put money into an SRS account. But SRS relief is only ever worth your marginal tax rate. On 42,000 a year, after earned income relief, CPF relief and child relief, his chargeable income sat right down in the 0 to 2% band. That $15,300 cap and its $4 relief would have bought him almost nothing, while locking the money away until statutory retirement age with a 5% penalty for taking it out early. SRS is a tool for people already paying meaningful tax. It was never his tool. So here is the honest sentence. He spent his retirement margin on his children, and he knew he was doing it. Both of them now earn more than the roughly $5,750 million he never reached, and when you ask him, he says he would do it again. So that is the whole machine, from the first fee letter to the last installment. Before we close, I owe you the uncomfortable part of any story like this. Because the reason you are hearing this one at all is that it worked. Run this exact plan 100 times across 100 ordinary Singaporean families, and you do not get 100 Mr. Tans. You get a spread. And the ones at the bad end of that spread never get made into a video. In one of those families, the child graduates into a soft job market, earns less than expected, and simply cannot repay the CPF education loan. The money sits in the ordinary account as an unpaid balance and the father's retirement takes the full hit alone. In another, retrenchment arrives at 52, 2 years into the first degree. The overtime disappears, the surplus disappears, and the family is left with a half-finished plan and a full-sized bill. In another, the medical event comes before the convocation. MediSave absorbs some of it, insurance absorbs some of it, and the rest comes out of exactly the same savings that were meant for school fees. And in the quietest failure of all, everyone stays healthy, everyone repays, and the degree simply does not lift the income the way the family assumed it would. Nothing went wrong. It just did not pay off. So let me be very plain about the dependency at the center of this. The CPF Education Loan Scheme only works as designed if the child repays the principal and the accrued interest back into the parent's ordinary account. If they cannot, it stops being a loan and becomes a donation from the parent's retirement. Mr. Tan made a bet on 2 specific people. He happened to be right. Plenty of loving, decent families make the same bet on children who love them just as much and still cannot pay, because life did not cooperate. That is not a character flaw. That is variance. Which brings me to the only useful question at the end of a story like this. What part of it can you actually take home, and what part of it belongs to him and to nobody else? 3 things travel. Saving before there is anything to save for. Refusing to let your standard of living rise every time your pay does. And being willing to sit down with the forms and actually claim the help that already exists. He started that transfer in 1991, 3 years before his daughter existed, for no reason other than fear left over from his own father's retrenchment. He had no goal. He just had the habit. The goal showed up 22 years later and found the money already waiting. What does not travel is the specific machinery. The exact scheme, the exact bursary tier, the fee in that particular year, the 2 children who happen to repay. Copy those blindly and you are copying a set of numbers that have already changed. Thresholds move. Retirement sums move. University fees move upward almost every single year. So if you are anywhere near this decision, go and read the current CPF, MO, and institution rules yourself, directly from the source, rather than trusting a number you heard in a video. And the caveat in full, once, clearly. This is education, not financial advice, and nothing here is a recommendation to buy, sell, or borrow anything. Mr. Tan is a composite, a character built from the shape of many ordinary Singaporean families, not a documented real person, and every figure is rounded and illustrative. So copy the behavior, not the person and not the specific instrument. The habit, the care on lifestyle, the willingness to fill in the form. That part is yours to take. The rest of it was his. He is 56 now. Still no car, 25 years, and counting. Still the same four-room flat he moved into in 1994, same lift lobby, same void deck with the same chess table. Every morning he walks down for a kopi-o at the coffee shop, the $1.40 kind, not the $6 kind. The last installment cleared just last year. Nobody at that table knows what he did, and he has never once mentioned it. A man's retirement margin is one of the few things he can spend without anyone ever seeing it, and Mr. Tan spent his on two graduates who now earn more than he ever did. If this one was worth your time, there are more Lukebook stories waiting, and I would be glad to have you along. Take care of yourself. Thanks for watching. If this made building wealth in Singapore a little clearer, give it a like and subscribe to Lukebook so you don't miss the next episode. See you in the next one.